Can you imagine being told that your very presence on a battlefield would be enough to make the enemy just turn and run? Well, that's pretty much what the first American soldiers in the Korean War were led to believe. The reality, though, was a brutal, bloody wake-up call. This is the story of that very first clash, the Battle of Osan. Look, these guys weren't some elite fighting force. They were a small, completely untested unit just thrown into the path of a war machine, and they were expected to be a simple roadblock. But what they ended up facing was a juggernaut that would absolutely shake the world. All right, so to really get what happened at Osan, you have to understand the sheer speed and the shock of the North Korean invasion. I mean, in the summer of 1950, South Korea was just completely collapsing. I mean, just look at this timeline for a second. June 25th, a massive invasion. Just 3 days later, the capital, Seoul, is gone. The South Korean army was completely shattered, and a panicked world, led by the US, had to scramble to do something. So, who did they send to stop this onslaught? A group that was hastily thrown together known as Task Force Smith. It was named for its commander, a World War II vet named Lieutenant Colonel Charles Bradford Smith. And this right here, this quote tells you everything you need to know about how uncertain this mission was. Colonel Smith's orders were basically, hey, go north, block a road. By the way, we have zero intel on the enemy. Good luck. I mean, it is an almost unbelievable way to kick off a war. So who were these soldiers? Well, they weren't hardened veterans. Think about this. 540 men, most of them teenagers, pulled from a pretty comfortable occupation duty in Japan with only 8 weeks of training. They were handed last war's gear, not much ammo, and then sent to stop a modern army. And this table just lays the mismatch totally bare. You've got Task Force Smith, all 540 of them, staring down 5,000 North Korean soldiers. And the real kicker, just look at that tank column. The Americans had zero. None. Not a single one. So this number here is crucial. 6. That was it. That was the total number of effective anti-tank shells the entire task force had. Just 6 shells to try and stop 36 Soviet-made tanks. Okay, so now we arrive at July 5th, 1950. The men of Task Force Smith are dug in on a ridge. They're overlooking the main highway. They're waiting. And they are about to meet the very harsh reality of this new war. And then, just after sunrise, they see it. A column of tanks just rumbling into view, heading straight for them. This was the moment of truth. So the Americans unleash everything they have. Their big artillery guns, the howitzers, the shells just bounce right off. Their recoilless rifles, which are basically shoulder-fired cannons, they score direct hits and do absolutely nothing. They fire 22 bazooka rockets, and still, the armor holds. I mean, can you imagine the shock? Just watching your best weapons fail completely. And the reason for this epic failure? The T-34/85, a Soviet beast of a tank that the American weapons simply could not touch. These tanks just rolled straight through the American lines, barely even noticing them. It must have been an absolutely humiliating moment. So, the tanks are gone, and they've left behind cut communication lines. The men of Task Force Smith are isolated, and they're waiting. They probably thought the worst was over. Well, they were wrong. The real assault was just about to begin. About an hour passes, and then another column appears. But this one is 6 miles long. It's a line of trucks carrying 2 full infantry regiments. That's nearly 5,000 soldiers. And they have no idea the Americans are waiting for them. The Americans open up with every single thing they've got, just tearing into the truck column. But the North Koreans were professional soldiers. They quickly regroup, they dismount, and they use their massive numbers to just swarm at the American flanks. And just like that, Task Force Smith is being surrounded. They held on for 3 hours, but it was hopeless. Colonel Smith orders a retreat. And what followed was just chaos, a complete rout. This is where the task force truly bled, caught out in the open, taking fire from every single side. And what happened next really reveals the true horror of this battle. Wounded men who couldn't retreat were left behind. They were later found executed, their hands bound behind their backs. It was a war crime that set a terribly grim tone for the rest of the conflict. The shooting was over in just a few hours, but the real impact of the Battle of Osan was really just beginning to unfold. The final numbers are just staggering. A 40% casualty rate. That means out of the 540 men who started the day, around 220 were either killed, wounded, or captured. It was a devastating blow for the very first American unit to see combat. Yeah, let's look a little closer at those numbers. 60 killed, 21 wounded, and 82 taken prisoner. And tragically, nearly half of those captured wouldn't even survive their time in the POW camps. It's the story of a unit that was utterly shattered. So you have to ask, was it all for nothing? Well, from a purely tactical view, it was a total disaster. But strategically, they actually succeeded. Task Force Smith's sacrifice bought 7 crucial hours, and that was just enough time for more U.S. troops to land and start building the next line of defense. But maybe the biggest impact wasn't even on the battlefield. It was back in the Pentagon. The Battle of Osan was a brutal shock to the American military system. It proved that its troops were poorly trained, dangerously under-equipped, and just completely unprepared for what was coming. It was truly a lesson learned in blood. And that really leaves us with a tough question. The men of Task Force Smith were sent to buy time. And they did. But when you look at the cost, you're left to wonder, was a 7-hour delay really worth the price they paid?